We now turn to the 20th century for the first time in this course. Historians generally agree that the true 19th century began in 1815 with the fall of Napoleon and did not truly end until 1914, the year World War I began. In many ways, the 20th century world was born not in the year 1900, but in August 1914. It may seem strange that to understand a 20th century war, we must look back to the 19th century, but World War I was the culmination of long-building tensions, national rivalries, alliances, militarism, and imperial ambition. Everything we have studied up to this point set the stage. All it took was one spark, and the entire system exploded. Even though more than a century has passed since World War I, we still live in its shadow. World War I began in August 1914, when two major alliance systems confronted one another. The Central Powers consisted primarily of Germany and Austria-Hungary, while the Allies, also known as the Entente Powers, included France, Britain, Russia, and Serbia. As the conflict expanded, additional nations joined the war. The Ottoman Empire entered on the side of the Central Powers in November 1914. Italy switched sides and joined the Allies in May 1915. And the United States entered the war on the Allied side in April 1917. The fighting continued until the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, bringing an end to the war. This date was originally commemorated as Armistice Day and is now observed in the United States as Veterans Day. World War I was unlike any conflict the world had previously experienced. One of its most distinctive features was the development of a vast system of trenches that transformed the battlefield. By the end of 1914, opposing armies had dug an enormous network of defensive trenches stretching nearly 400 miles from the English Channel to the Swiss border. This continuous line of fortifications created an unprecedented battlefield in which soldiers could, in theory, travel underground across much of Western Europe. Both sides entrenched their forces because advances in military technology had made defensive positions far stronger than offensive attacks, leading to a prolonged and deadly stalemate on the Western Front. The early 20th century saw the introduction of new military technologies that made attacking enemy positions extraordinarily dangerous. Machine guns and heavy artillery became the dominant defensive weapons of the war, capable of killing thousands of soldiers within minutes. As a result, the safest military strategy was often to remain behind fortified positions and wait for the enemy to advance, only to be cut down by concentrated fire. This reality helped create the deadly stalemate that characterized much of World War I. Although machine guns and artillery would later become effective offensive weapons in World War II when combined with tanks, aircraft, and armored vehicles, such technologies were still in their infancy during World War I. Tanks were slow and unreliable, artillery was difficult to move quickly, and airplanes remained largely experimental. Consequently, neither side could achieve a decisive breakthrough, and the war became a prolonged conflict of waiting and attrition rather than rapid movement and maneuver. It might seem difficult to understand why military commanders continued ordering soldiers to charge across open ground into the deadly fire of machine guns and artillery. However, most generals had been trained in the military traditions of the 19th century, when victories were often achieved through aggressive offensives, mass infantry assaults, and displays of courage and determination. They believed that a sufficiently large and determined attack could eventually break through enemy lines, just as similar tactics had succeeded in earlier wars. As the stalemate on the Western Front dragged on and neither side could gain a decisive advantage, commanders grew increasingly desperate to achieve a breakthrough. This led to repeated offensives that resulted in enormous casualties with little territorial gain, producing a level of mass slaughter that was unprecedented in human history. The numbers alone reveal the immense human cost of World War I. France mobilized approximately 8.4 million men, of whom 1.4 million were killed and another 4.8 million were wounded or reported missing, resulting in casualties for nearly 73% of all those who served. Germany mobilized about 11 million soldiers and suffered 1.8 million deaths, while an additional 5.3 million were wounded or missing, meaning roughly 65% of German troops became casualties. Austria-Hungary experienced even higher losses relative to its forces, mobilizing 7.8 million men, losing 1.2 million killed and suffering 5.8 million wounded or missing, a staggering casualty rate of nearly 90%. Although the United States entered the war late and sustained far fewer losses than the European powers, approximately 115,000 Americans were killed, most of them during the intense fighting of 1918. Altogether, around 9 million soldiers died on the battlefield during the war. Beyond these deaths and physical injuries, millions more returned home with lasting psychological and emotional wounds, making World War I one of the most devastating catastrophes in modern history. The scale of death and destruction during World War I had profound consequences that extended far beyond the battlefield. The war transformed politics, disrupted economies, reshaped cultures, and left deep psychological scars on an entire generation. Millions of families mourned lost fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands, while the survivors often struggled with physical disabilities and emotional trauma. The enormous costs of the conflict weakened governments, strained national economies, and contributed to political instability across Europe. Culturally, the war challenged long-held beliefs about progress, reason, and the benefits of modern civilization. The optimism and confidence that had characterized much of the 19th century gave way to disillusionment, cynicism, and uncertainty. In many ways, World War I marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, ushering in the violent and turbulent realities of the modern world.